of been all history focused today, kind of unintentionally, but interesting looks all the way around. And if it's at 8 o'clock on Tuesday morning, it's Dave Does History on Bill Mick Live. Glad you're with us on this 31st of March, 2026. Warped Reality is our headline at BillMick.com. Stories and a link to Dave Does History there for you on the show page this morning. Dave, the headline that you gave me is Mary Ann or Ginger. I kind of like that as a start for our history discussion.
Well, it is a deceptively simple pop culture fluff piece that often gets argued. I can assure you that I have had this discussion in the middle of the night, in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, as we tooled around. You run out of things to talk about, and that's one of those things that always comes up. Mary Ann or Ginger, and then of course there's always the other guy that's got to say, well, Mrs. Howell, she's old and rich. I mean, it's like, well, but really it's that Mary Ann. When
you're on a submarine, somebody's screaming, "The professor!"
Yeah, I'm sure of that, or Gilligan. But it's an interesting psychological test, and oddly enough, there are stories out there about studies that have been done on this that show psychologically what your choice might be says about you, with regards to what you value, what's important to you, and those sorts of things. If you pick Ginger, you're into superficial stuff. If you pick Mary Ann, you're into the wholesome stuff. But I think there's something deeper involved here. I like the show Gilligan's Island. It's one of my favorites. It's one of those ones that I run on a regular basis when I'm just in here and there's nothing but women's sports on TV. I'll put on Gilligan's Island. And the first season of Gilligan's Island is absolutely fascinating from a TV standpoint. Number one, the original pilot didn't have Mary Ann and Ginger, didn't have the professor, didn't have a lot of the stuff that you're used to. But it was also, if you know your trivia, if you see the original opening scene, the flags are at half-mast because it was filmed a couple of days after the assassination of Kennedy. There's all of this stuff in there. But there's also a lot of bit of trivia about the characters. And there's a scene in one of the early episodes, which, by the way, is directed by the great Ida Lupino, who is one of my favorites of all time, and she was fantastic in the Humphrey Bogart movie High Sierra. She's directing, Bill, Gilligan's Island. So she's gone from being an actress on the screen with Humphrey Bogart to directing 4 episodes of Gilligan's Island. And as she's directing this episode, we're still early in the series, and we're kind of learning about the characters. And so the radio is talking about these missing people, and it's talking about the skipper, Jonas Grumby, and the World War II veteran, and his assistant, Willie Gilligan, and the professor, Roy Hinckley, whose name we kind of knew, but we don't really learn until the Brady Bunch movie, the second Brady Bunch movie. Those kind of things. And then they're talking about Ginger being this, glorious actress. And then they throw in this thing about Mary Ann from Kansas. And it's almost this throwaway line. But it's that throwaway line that really intrigued me and set me down this path that we're going to go on today. And that is very simply this question. It leads to this trivia question. How many of you know what the name of Mary Ann's uncle and aunt are? Well, if you watch the show, you know. And if you were watching it in 1963, you probably went, well, that makes sense. Today, you probably don't even notice.
Interesting. We pick it up in just 60 seconds. Dave Does History on Bill Mick Live. You can always follow WMMB on Instagram. It's at WMMB Radio. So, Dave, I got to admit, I'm clueless. I don't remember her aunt and uncle, and I certainly don't know the reference if I don't remember that.
So you have these 2 women, Ginger, who's this, starlet, all this stuff. Then you got Mary Ann, who's this wholesome, all-American apple pie, And the name of her, and the radio tells us that the name of her aunt and uncle are George and Martha. Now, in 1963, when you heard that, you probably went, well, that makes sense. She's the all-American girl, and she's comes from a family that's named George and Martha, who are, of course, George Washington and Martha Washington, the first president and first lady of the country. There's this connection. Kent. You were thinking who?
Kent.
Oh, yeah. Well, not quite.
She's Superman's sister. Come on.
Right. But you get this, there was this almost presumption, and anybody watching that in 1963 would have immediately got that. They would have immediately picked up on that reference. Most people today, it'll blow right by them, if they even hear it, because they're probably got their heads in their phones on, playing some game while they're watching this thing, if they're even watching it. Modern audiences largely miss those connections. It's a fading historical memory that contrasts very sharply with the memory of the founders, who often, we don't think about this, used popular entertainment to forge shared historical touch points. Now, to go back to what I was saying earlier in the show, which is about this idea of why with history, we have to understand why of history. We have to understand the ideas that were going on there. The founders lived in a world, George Washington, James Madison, John Adams, they lived in a world, oh, by the way, Francis Marion, Ebenezer Bowman, they all lived in that world where history and culture were not separate lanes. Today, as we saw with the professor in the first hour, there's this tendency to try to use history to tweak culture, I guess, in a way. And if you don't understand the why of the history, you miss what she's doing. In the Founders era, these were the same road. Theaters, books, speeches, all of it reinforced a shared understanding of liberty. Where did it come from? This idea of liberty was so imperative to the founders that it's important to us, and it's incumbent on us to understand why. Not just what. Why? What is it about this that was so critical to them that it just almost ingrained in them? This idea that their history wasn't mythology. This is something that bothers me tremendously, is the way we treat Roman, Greek mythology, what we call mythology, and even other cultures and their mythologies. We call it mythology, and we use that word to sort of dismiss things. Think in terms of the Odyssey and the Iliad. We just dismiss it as mythology. But to the people of that generation, to the founders and framers of this country, it was not mythology in the sense that it's a fake story used to entertain. This was actual history. Roman history, Greek history, Trojan history, all of these ideas, Carthaginian history, all of these things mixed in together to their common understanding of things, so that when they were watching the entertainment of their day, they would immediately get those references. They would immediately understand those things. And it was repetitively presented to them in a way that perhaps we don't necessarily use today, to make sure that the lessons were repeatedly taught over and over and over again. Liberty in that era was not just debated. It was performed. It was taught, and consequently, it was absorbed. And I submit to you today that, like watching Gilligan's Island, we've kind of lost that unity. There was a time when everybody who turned on that episode of Gilligan's Island would have immediately understood what was being told to you about Mary Ann Summers of wherever it was in Kansas. You would have immediately understood that what she represented was the American ideal of what a young woman was supposed to be. Ginger was beautiful. She was impressive. She was all that stuff. But she's not the girl you want to take home to mom. Mary Ann is. The historians, the people who understood the history, would have heard George and Martha were her aunt and uncle who raised her, and they would have immediately said, That's the gal for me. See the difference? Today, I don't think we would get a Marianne that has blue hair, nose ring, and tattooed all up, and we'd go, well, that's the thing of the day. When a culture forgets its references, we don't just lose the jokes. How many of you watched Rocky and Bullwinkle?
Yeah.
When you forget your history, you don't just lose the joke. You lose the underlying meaning of things. And this is the point which we bring ourselves to today with the framers and founders of this country who understood a classical education and classical history to the point and to the degree where someone like this professor at Amherst would not have been able to get away with an article like she got away with this morning, because they knew their history and they knew what it had taught them. And that's what's important. Because
and Dave Bowman continues to put it all in context. It's Dave Does History on Bill Mick Live. We continue in moments.
Well, and that's kind of the point, is that once upon a time, we understood history. We got those references. We understood what they were trying to tell us. I'm not so sure that today we do that anymore. I think that's a problem. The framers, of course, were steeped in classical history. It almost feels like a foreign thing now, but they were taught Latin, they were taught Greek, and I'm not saying we should learn Latin and Greek today because we live in the 21st century, but there was a certain level of understanding about things that you got. And one of the problems I have is there's always this assumption it was just the rich people that were learning this stuff. No, it was everybody was learning this. Americans read. Americans were maybe not formally educated, but they understood these ideas. They were steeped in these traditions of Rome, of Livy, of Sallust, of Tacitus. I mean, books that I have sitting here on my shelf that I've read many times, and this idea of history to them is important because it taught them. We say this all the time, Bill. We have to have virtue as a society. We have to, as a citizen, we have to have virtue. Well, what does that mean? Why do we have to have that? Well, again, this history is what tells us that. The vital Republican principle, above all others, is that you must be willing to put, excuse me, you must be willing to put your country's needs ahead of your own private desires. For example, George Washington is often referred to as the American Cincinnatus. He's also referred to as the American Fabian. There are reasons for that. Cincinnatus, of course, was a famous Roman general whose most important idea was that when he was given the powership of the dictatorship, which was actually an office in ancient Rome, the dictator, he did what he was asked to do, and then he put his power aside and he went back to his farm. George Washington does the same thing. He doesn't have dictatorial powers, but he, as many people have noted, could have become king had he chosen to in 1783, but he didn't. He went back to his farm. And that's why you today have a Cincinnati Society, Society of Cincinnati, which celebrates George Washington. And it's important to understand their understanding of how all this works. Now, one of the things that Congress did, the Second Continental Congress, during the American Revolutionary War, was they banned entertaining plays. They felt that these were perhaps morally suspect, and they tended, plays were not a big thing. We talked about this with the theater of war and the British putting on plays. There was this idea that this was going to be problematic. And George Washington looked around and went, wait a minute. We're not going to do that because there is a play that I want my men to see and I want them to know because it teaches them these values. And that's how we enter into the 18th century blockbuster of blockbusters, The Tragedy of Cato. He wanted this play in front of his troops intently. The play is called Cato, a tragedy, or the tragedy of Cato. It's by a guy by the name of Jacob Joseph Addison. And it is the true story of a guy by the name of Cato the Younger. Cato the Younger was a stoic Roman aristocrat, a confirmed Republican, and the absolute enemy of Julius Caesar. He opposed Caesar. He hated Caesar. He wouldn't, when Caesar would offer him, as we got to the end, when Caesar would offer him, a forgiveness and a pardon, he refused it on the basis of that would mean that he would have to acknowledge that Caesar had the power to do that for him, and he wasn't going to do that. He is the absolute virtuous example to early Americans of what republicanism was supposed to be about. And this play becomes a huge hit. It's written in the early 1700s. It is performed in London. It is performed in America. It is quoted. It is repeated. It is discussed. It becomes where we ask the question, Marianne and Ginger, they ask the question, Juba or Marcia. They have the same conversations about this play that we have about Gilligan's Island. I'm not going to go through the whole plot of the play, but basically it's the story of Cato the Younger and how he opposes Julius Caesar and the people around him and how he sets the standard for what a republican is supposed to be. Around him in this play, everything that destroys a republic, ambition, betrayal, emotional impulse, personal desire, all of these things pit the idea of public duty versus private passion against each other. And this play sits there like a quiet indictment. When personal desire overrides public duty, collapse of the republic is not far behind. And Washington and others wanted this lesson repeatedly inculcated into the American people. Not that they weren't already reading it, because they were. Something remarkable happens when you put on a play like this, when you put on a TV show. The lines eventually leave the stage and they become part of your culture. How many times do we quote Seinfeld? These things work their way into our stuff. They work their way into speeches, into letters, into rhetoric. We end up with a situation where there are three particular quotes from this play that find their way into things. Listen to this. It is not now a time to talk of aught but chains or conquest, liberty or death. This is the very words that Patrick Henry will quote when he gives his famous liberty or death speech. Comes straight out of Cato. Nathan Hale. What a pity it is that we can die but once to serve our country. I regret that I only have one life to live for my country. Right out of Cato. George Washington even writes a letter to Benedict Arnold in which he quotes Cato. This becomes the ubiquitous play that becomes part of the culture of liberty. Cato's last stand, similar to Washington in Valley Forge in 1778. And it's there that Washington puts on this play to remind his men of why it is that they're doing this. What's so important about this? Why do we have to know these things?
Call Bill at 321-768-1240 or use the TalkBack feature on the iHeartRadio app.
Wrapping up Dave Does History on a Tuesday morning on Bill Mick Live, and those historic references that we used to get, maybe we get them now, maybe we don't, and how important they were. And Dave, I think the biggest thing you've said to me so far today is when you start losing that is when you start losing the country. The republic could be gone. We don't have the values that we used to have and need to have to maintain it.
Well, and that's the purpose of history, is to inculcate those values. That's the point of the Odyssey. It's the point of the Iliad. It's the point of Livy and Sulla Sallust and Plutarch and all these people. It's the point that you don't get when you read an Amherst professor writing about how the American Revolution was about LGBTQ stuff. If you are grounded in, ancient history and philosophy and those kinds of things, you understand what she's actually trying to do, and that it's not actually history, it's just subjective. These things are missing to us today, and it's why, and I think so, people keep asking, how are we off the rails? Why are people tearing down statues? Because they don't know why they're there to begin with. And so it's easy to convince them that, well, they must be bad. It's a simple step. When you're looking at the architecture of American civic virtue as practiced by the founders and later the framers, you have raw data, which is this classical history, these classical ideas that have been ingrained and inculcated through thousands of years. It's raw data, but then on the other side you have this theatrical drama, the emotional vehicle that takes that raw data and turns it into what we can call the American identity. When the crisis of the American Revolution hits, the founders didn't panic. They enacted a script that was basically retelling the story of Cato. This is what happened. This combination would forge a nation built on placing public liberty above private passions, which is basically the opposite of libertarianism. They demanded placing a public good above your own private desires. That is what is known as civic virtue. And we don't teach that today at all because we don't understand these things. We don't have these discussions. We actually talk about, we don't really understand the depth of the argument, Ginger or Marianne. We don't understand that the people who made that show intended for that argument to be, do you want the superficial, the private desire, or do you want the public good? Do you want the all-American wholesome? People in 1963 watching that would have understood that. Today, not so sure they would. These laws, these rights, this generous plan that we have put in place of power is not self-sustaining. As Cato will say in his play, as Cato will be quoted in his play by Addison, remember, O friends, the laws, the rights so dearly bought, the price of so much blood. Oh, let it never perish in your hands. It's a reminder that none of this is cheap. And on that stage at Valley Forge, Washington is reminding his troops. He's reminding the people that are hanging around the camp. He's reminding everyone in the country, this is why we are doing this. We are purchasing our liberty with our blood. And the day we forget that, the day that becomes trivial, the day that becomes something we never think about, never get the references to. How many references go by every day that are to those things, but we don't get them. We don't understand them. How many of you understand why there's normally a ball on top of a flagpole? How many of you have looked at the seal, the circular seals for the various military departments, and particularly the Army Department? Do you understand the symbols that are there? Do you understand what the words of the national anthem are saying to you? Not just the first verse, read the whole thing. All of these things go by us each and every day. And superficially we see them, but do we recognize them? We're right back where we started again, Marianne or Ginger. We may or may not even notice the names George or Martha. Because if we didn't, we're not just missing a joke. We're missing the very foundation that the founders and later the framers would stand us upon. And by missing that history, by not understanding the why these things are important, we make them unimportant. And as Addison in his play would write, Cato say, are we remembering the laws, the rights that were so dearly bought by the price of so much blood? Is it perishing in our hands? And if it is, we have failed to be that virtuous citizen that Washington wanted us to be.
Dave, let's get to the phones. We check in. Line 1, you're up on Bill Mick Live. Good morning.
Hey, good morning, Bill Mick in Palm Bay. Good morning, Dave. What I see is, I talk to people and they don't understand anything. They're still on Trump hating. They're not looking at anything, and they're not accepting anything. You cannot force it into their head. They reject it immediately. So how do you inform someone if their parents and their parents' parents don't know it? How can you get them to understand what the real like the ball on top of the flagpole? I don't think that's for lightning, to attract lightning. I think it's more for birds, like the bald eagle or something like that.
Well, let's get Dave's answer in, and you raise an interesting question, Nick, which is, where does the loss of all of this understanding begin? Dave, I'll let you respond quickly.
Well, let's go back to this argument, Marianne or Ginger. The reality is that we have changed in some ways, Bill. We've dumbed down as a society. We have handed over the teaching and the inculcating of this history to people who, number one, didn't understand it themselves. That's how you get a professor who says the American Revolutionary War was about LGBTQ rights. It's how you get a professor who says that the Cold War was about LGBTQ. They weren't there. They didn't experience it, but they have an agenda. They have a perception. And again, I believe all history is subjective. All of it is editorial. So if you pick and choose the pieces that you want, you're going to get the result you want. In the same way, the founders and framers wanted a society that was virtuous and liberty-minded. And so their entertainment, their books, their teachings, their preachings, all of that stuff was revolved around this idea of liberty and virtue, in the idea that the public good was more important than private desire. You could simply argue, you don't have to look very far in today's society to see we don't believe that as a society. Even on the conservative right, we talk about my rights and my wants and my property and my this and my that. That wasn't what Washington and the founders were trying to get us to think in terms of. And so because we have lost that education, because we have lost all of that history of republicanism, all of that history of virtue, and we haven't taught it, why are we surprised that our society for the last, 6, 8, 10 generations is missing that? There was a time when people understood these things. That time has changed. How do we get that back? Well, you got to do it one person at a time. I'm teaching Ben. Someday, Ben hopefully will teach his children, and hopefully they will teach their children. You can't say to someone else, you have to do it this way. You have to do it yourself, and you have to start with yourself.
Dave, you bring to mind a conversation I had a week or so ago, and the subject in general was January 6th. And we were talking about the various things that went on that day, and the phrase thrown at me was, well, that is our capital. Well, it is ours, but it's not as if you have a right to enter it at any time the way you like because your tax dollars paid for it, which was the argument that was thrown at me. I said, we also have a right to expect that we're going to properly protect that federal property and those people we elect to send up there and do the job reasonably from what could be a riotous situation. And it was like almost a shocked look when I said that. It's like, I paid for it. I got a right to do what I want. Back to the libertarianism thing that you mentioned earlier. No, we've forgotten that this nation like it or not, we are collective here, and we working together for the goals of that nation, and we've kind of thrown it in the background.
It's almost like we've redefined the word our to mean mine. It's ours, meaning mine. You have to see it my way. And we keep forgetting that there's a whole big country out there that may not see it the same way. And our system was set up to resolve those conflicts. But we're not using that system. Instead, we are using power to dictate what we want. And that's not what Washington, not what the framers, not what the founders, and certainly not what the ancients would have done.
And as we talked earlier, that when we do have the power by majorities in both houses of Congress and the White House, we don't use it because we prefer to see the battle go on. Yeah. It's been so, Dave. I was going to ask you the same thing. I'm going with Marianne. Always did. That was me, man.
Clearly it's Marianne because I'm a historian and I'm an American. And not saying I wouldn't date Ginger, just saying the girl you want to take
her home to mom is what you said.
The girl you want to spend your life with is the girl who represents the values that you have.
Dave Bowman, always a good job. Thank you, my friend. I'll talk to you next week.
We'll see you then.
They saw old Caesar cross a line he would not yield. Turn a public trust into a private field. The Senate kept talking, but it didn't mean a thing when the people bowed down to a self-made king.
Now listen real close, cause it don't arrive with drums.
It creeps in quiet while the crowd just hums.
A little more power, just a little each day.
Till the voice of the people fades away.
They wrote it all down so we'd see it coming clear. Not just for their time, but for every year.
A republic isn't paper, it's a thing you must defend, or it slips through your hands in the end. From Rome to home, they carry the flame. Build a republic, not a king with a name. From Rome to home, they knew what to do. Hold on to virtue or it all slips through. Yeah. Stand up steady, keep it strong. It only survives if we all play along. Rome didn't fall in a single night. It lost its balance, then lost its fight. So every age has a choice to make. Guard what you have, or watch it break. Oh, 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 From Rome to home,
It's still the same.
it's still the same.
God be above.
Got the republic, or lose the game. From Rome to home,
Now it's on you.
now it's on you.
Keep it alive.
Keep it alive in the things you do. Oh.
Stand
Up steady, keep it strong. It only survives if we all play along. That's not ancient history. That's That's today.